But there are cracks in the system. Quote, "One evening, when I was standing in the kitchen I'd been too lazy to heat, washing my feet before bed, I suddenly realized that communism truly is the whole world's future. No matter how much it's been heard, no matter from whom, I stood on one leg. The revealed perspective, that truly all is before us, did not for a moment rescue me from my torpor. The opposite. Maybe it's only that those who say it now, who mix it into every story as if scratching their noses, so salaried and thoughtless, or with a certain ulterior motive, which has also been as long self-sustaining as the world, whose creator turned it on and then went contentedly into oblivion, the ulterior motive of private security, comprehensible to all, an ulterior motive familiar to everyone. Yes, maybe it's that even they will still have to face this revelation. How tame their little everyday auto-lie, already a lie because automatic, will suddenly turn real, turn into a gigantic reality, and even they, like all others, every one of them, like every one of every other, will have to learn to live there, in the new world. Yes, maybe it's that from this imagination figment we might find some murky schadenfreude comfort. Schadenfreude, worthless. I stand here like a crane, one leg on the floor and one in the sink, under the cold spurt." Footnote: Paul Erik Rummo, Estonian writer, 1970. End quote. A suspicious old man had hobnobbed his way into the group. This explains Władysław's excursions and his increased cheer. No one knows exactly how this began, but, knowing Władysław, it is perfectly comprehensible. Let's assume it happened as follows. Zawisza was always on an adventure somewhere, and he knew half the city's intelligentsia. He also knew those who were, to put it nicely, far removed from it. There was a group of people who always belonged to two worlds at once, which is not at all to say that they belonged to somewhere in between. Abram Goldovsky was one of these. In his youth he'd written a couple of scandalous plays that theaters did want terribly to produce, but for some reason they were quickly stricken from the program. One might basically have said that his stature as an author was based on things nobody had ever actually read or seen, but people heard that he was a hardcore dude, and so it was. His fame had seriously dwindled over time because he'd been involved in other areas for about a decade now. Nobody knew exactly what these areas were, but malicious rumors suggested that he plied a sordid, rotten trade, because no normal person would have the kind of arrogance to speak badly of everything, to despise all that was Polish, from the literature to the cuisine. Of course, these people didn't know Goldovsky personally. They may have seen him once through a window as he had his mid-morning coffee with a model in the foyer of a luxury hotel. That, anyway, was more than enough to form an opinion. Goldovsky probably took the young Zawisza out to eat. Let's go grab a bite somewhere and chat. He certainly had a motive. One did not need to look far for that. An article had appeared once in Plashia discussing the issue of whether it was possible to accept money while keeping your soul. Goldovsky was the example given there. Maybe he wanted to prove to them he had a heart. This soul issue was especially interesting to Pan Tramp. No, he wasn't the article's author, but it was right up his alley. He had thought out several possible solutions to the problem. He went joyfully about announcing them to anyone who wanted to listen, and everyone did. Adam had money, but he gave it away, because the only thing you can do with money is give it away. He lives at the height of his ideals, and life gave him a very early opportunity to stay true to them. I admire him, but there are still countless other alternatives. Goldovsky invested his cash. Again, respect. Built it up and isn't ashamed, doesn't look down at the ground, doesn't mumble, "Oh, what do you mean me? Not like I've done anything, nothing worth mentioning." We have pals who think money corrupts everything. I know a bookkeeper like that. He'd think it was a nice idea if he could take the souls of sinners by the hand and lead them to hell himself. That's probably partly the cretinism of his profession. Władysław certainly wants to have a Lamborghini period someday. That way he'll at least know how it is. Afterwards, he can give his money away again. The question seemed to depress Władysław. He shook his head for a time and grabbed a smoke for support. But what can I say? Sure, maybe I've thought about things like that, but not the way you all think. When I'm not listening, everything that happens once a guy leaves the room is all so great. You think I'm fame-crazed and want that fame so it can take me to money. No, that's not at all how it is. Not at this point. I can't have the kind of problem you can, or that most people can, because I've never had money, and I can't ever have it. I was made out of poverty. I am poverty. You want to paint an allegory of poverty? You can use me as a model. No, tell me, what might poverty look like? Everybody knows death is a dancing skeleton, but poverty is my face to the T. I'm too busy with my imagination to have time for other things. Maybe in the literal sense of the word, I don't actually live in this world, but in my own. And even if my helpless attempts to bring that world to other people have been fruitless until now, in that sense, nothing's changed. The only thing that motivates me to keep living, the only thing I know how to do and can do, is translate my reality into this world's phantasmagoria. But I have a feeling that if people are already asking like this, then there's an answer in that. The question prevents you from enjoying the Lamborghini. No. As far as I'm concerned, this riddle is totally unnecessary. The problem posed motivated Adam to write an edifying new article, and, though it never appeared, he spelled out his main points to his comrades in brief. Isn't it so that when there are so many of these articles and opinions, they form a kind of single, indistinguishable mass? An archetypal opinion lump that nobody can actually manage to chew through, and eventually the words start to spin around in a circle in front of your eyes, simply turning into black spots, blots, lines, and blocks that carry no meaning whatsoever. He had even looked up a nice quote from Steinbeck's The Winter of Our Discontent to go at the article's head. Quote, "And that was the money that makes money. It doesn't matter how you get it, just as long as you get it and use it to make more. I'm not being cynical. Our lord and master, Marullo of the ancient Roman name, is quite right. Where money is concerned, the ordinary rules of conduct take a holiday. Why do I talk to groceries? Perhaps because you are discreet. You do not repeat my words, or gossip. Money is a crass and ungracious subject only when you have it. The poor find it fascinating. But don't you agree that if one becomes actively interested in money, he should know something of its nature, and character, and tendencies? I'm afraid that very few men, and they, great artists or misers, are interested in money for itself." End quote. Adam's point of view was something like this. It's not like making money is somehow different from anything else you pick up to fill the time. Go do slave labor somewhere. Ugh. That'll ruin your soul just the same. Money is structured to produce extremes. If some people are scraping up crumbs, others are at the casino. You have little. You want to have more. You already have more. You want to double it. And then money becomes something totally on its own that's now not at all what it was intended for. It's no longer just an exchange of value, but social status, a symbol, a thing in itself. What did I do when I had money? Was I happier? Did I get sad when it ran out? Far as I can tell, I was typical. Okay, fine, I bought myself new shoes. That's a nice thing to treat yourself to, once in a while. I've worn those shoes for 6 years now, and I will for another 10, or as long as the soles can be replaced. Cobblers need work too. Now, imagine I bought myself 10 pairs of shoes every month. What would the point be? I bought a couple nice handkerchiefs and a sweet new radio, but I'm not even the kind of guy who goes around flaunting it, which would be asinine. But people do that if they suddenly get a bunch of money from somewhere. They storm off to the shop and buy up all kinds of sick shit. It reminds me of a story I once heard about some country lady who sold off her apartment and then literally that day went and bought herself a fur coat for half the money. It was too small for her when she bought it, so she couldn't actually even wear it, and then 5 years later she sold it off for nothing. Like she was only selling the sleeve. You only need enough money to have a normal life. I mean, normal would be if you could live without money at all, but if you can't do that, then I'm certainly not going to have moral qualms about shoplifting. Not if my stomach is empty. I'm representing the Jesuit worldview here. Got money? Good. If not, find it. If you don't find it, take it. And most of the time, you can manage without it. But Goldovsky is an interesting guy. His crusade against the intelligentsia totally fascinates me. There's something honest in it. Solisław sat on the windowsill, with one leg wrapped around the other, like a crane, or Andersen's one-legged tin soldier. The studio window was open, and smoke twirled in front of it like a cloud because it was foggy outside, and the fog was like a wall that let none of the fumes out. The studio had not really been a studio for a long time, and was called so only out of long habit. Rusnak had cleared out. It was no longer possible to work there, not with someone or other smoking and loitering about all the time, not with the floor covered in cups, and not with people pouring in and out. In his own quiet way, Arkadios had become a wealthy man compared to the others. That is, he worked non-stop. But he gave the impression that he was the same cool freeloader as always, if only a bit less talkative. It wasn't true. He was the most diligent and consistent of all of them, and all the ancient yeoman genes were nicely preserved in him, well adapted for the modern age. You know, that's what I like about Adam, is his persuasiveness. If Adam decided to found an ascetic order, I'd join it too. If he said that we're so far from a communist social formation that we have to create a bank and collect all available resources there, I'd go put a tie on and study stock indices for him. Zawisza as a banker was a dopey thought, of course, but he'd fit in perfectly at a stock exchange. There's only his kind there. It's not like I've come up with anything myself, Adam retorted. I study from the best. I follow the advice of specialists, and I honor authority. Normal is to not strive to stand on your own at all costs. Stand on strong foundations and things will go well. Nowadays, it's not very fashionable to emphasize that anybody's been smart before you, or even that there's somebody with a bunch of smarts just next to you. These days, intellectual isolation is basically programmatic for some reason, and nobody can accept that you can use other people's ideas as a means to your own ends. Authorities are generally good for dealing with your thoughts, for example. I really do recommend dealing with your thoughts, understanding what you think about different things and why you think that way. We don't come up with a large part of our opinions ourselves. We take them from somewhere else. It'd be good to know where they come from, so it doesn't happen randomly. So you don't think the thoughts of people you don't actually agree with. At the same time, if you've genuinely thought something out yourself, it's invariably reasonable to find out what other people think and how they've arrived at their conclusions. In some sense, it's like dealing with a picture of yourself, but in a much more progressive way, because the larger plan is to also deal with the world and with other people, and not just with questions of a listless social hierarchy. And that's the reason I'm so dogged about getting an influx of people, ideas, and writings that are antithetical to us. It's through them that we better understand who we are. Thus Adam, the authority, described the thoughts moving behind his angular forehead. And even if Solisław made a face that said he listened, and bowed uncritically to Adam and his forehead, in blind faith, Solisław actually only did what he wanted to do, and what he wanted to happen, happened. There was no escape, therefore, from Goldovsky. Solisław soon tried to smuggle his new friend into the old system. He thought it would go more painlessly than it did. Even such an avant-garde corner as this was brimming with prejudices. It's possible that there was a good bit of generational mulishness, as Goldovsky was a member of an older set, and his jokes ought to have been played out. Or just have him tell them somewhere else. There's no need to come and hoist yourself up onto someone else's ship, certainly not when it's sailing fine without you. The editorial board stood unanimously opposed to even such a trifling innocent thing as a tiny visitor's article. What do you mean publish, Goldovsky? Listen, guys, don't let that money grubber start sashaying around here. This is a normal place. Don't make it as mindless a place as the rest of the world. He only wants to publish book reviews. We've accepted contributor articles from day one. What's the excuse for not taking this one? And on top of that, he's written about Poland's smoothest author's new book. That book is like a lullaby. I think it's an interesting dissonance that such an old ogre is a fan. Adam spoke calmly and clearly, as if to children. We have principles, and one Abram isn't going to turn those principles on its head. If we don't look for commonalities with phenomena that are incomprehensible and hostile to us, then we're no different from all those meatheads whose defining characteristic is their unwillingness to be open to anything that's not them. That's a shit revolutionary practice. Okay, you have a problem with your parents' generation, but what have you done about it? Here's your opportunity. But despite the enthusiastic, or at least gently supportive, leadership, the wave of opposition was powerful. It included, for example, Samuel Orlinsky, whose connection to Plasia was more of a spiritual kind, and whose writings, on the rare occasions he did any, were measly experimental attempts that were understood, at best, by only Suliswav and the girls who liked Orlinsky. But in his soul he'd taken the position that he was unquestionably Plasia's conscience, and Samuel was worried. He appeared in an entirely unwanted time, a regular workday with no festive atmosphere, looking grey and tired as he spoke with a quiet, hesitant voice. No, you don't understand. This isn't simply someone and something that comes along and appears in your columns. This is a change. I'm not interested in what your attitude is. I care what you believe in. And now I don't understand what that is anymore. Okay, maybe Plasia's cool wasn't the most solid foundation, but no. Now people think nobody needs that anymore? That was for 14-year-old girls? We don't want to be cool for 14-year-old girls anymore. And also, not for the 40-year-old men who thought, oh, awesome, finally something with some thought in it. And now you're leaving them. You're going somewhere else, somewhere unknown. You're going off to try to win something, but you've never lost. Sulislav Zavija was unshakable. He didn't doubt for a moment, but he at least tried to justify it. I'm talking to you about skill, which is a virtue. Skill is what makes a person a person. It's the full balance between a blank slate and predetermination. Here we have the skill to be polite, the skill to write good texts, the skill to choose associates, even the skill to understand that opinions change, and you can change your beliefs. If you don't have that skill, then things can take very unpleasant turns. You produce atrocious writings, hostility between people, and other vague nonsense. No, Orlinsky answered, sadly. Taken separately, skill is just a set of required movements. A person gains the meaning of being human from a purpose and an ideal. From what for? People say psychopaths are very good communicators. There is truth that supports and explains ideals, and there is truth that warps or poisons them, and there isn't a simple way to distinguish them. Mistrust remained. To top it all off, the article that came as a greeting and peace offering was totally lifeless. It was like a punch under the belt, because such a meek, generous encomium somehow didn't jibe with Abram's earlier, aggressive style. "How does such a thing even get written?" griped little Julia, who was one of Goldovsky's angriest opponents and one of the few willing to say so to his face. "It's so syrupy and saccharine that it becomes a parody of itself. Or in the best case, like an insincere pretense that you can see is deliberate from a kilometer away." "This is word for word his style, it seems to me," Adam announced. "No one imagines that Goldovsky could be sentimental, or discuss a matter of the soul. This is exactly the right move to achieve the alienating effect he wants. Everybody's expecting profanity, and the realism of Zola's coal miners so they can say, 'Told you so,' but he starts up and writes a romantic, reminiscing panegyric to an aging male writer. It's cool and well thought out, and everybody is even angrier." At the beginning, the Abram Goldovsky question was discussed fierily, but over time, everything blew over. People got used to it, and even the angriest opponents mellowed and admitted that there wasn't actually anything all that wrong with him. Although most of them couldn't understand the swaggering blowhard's motives for grafting himself onto them, nobody was losing sleep over it anymore. The most widespread view, of course, was that Goldovsky was pumping young blood into his veins in order that some of the halo of a New Age rebel should fall on his head as well. Funny old man, people thought. Talks to you in your kitchen like he's making a speech before the masses, and he's vain as the devil. There was some childish fun in all of it, and it made people sympathetic. Maybe he's just bored, like a Krasnoludek who's run out of work and comes and pours earthworms through your window with a bucket. His contributions came very rarely. In fact, there were only a couple of them, and they were the same kind of random old writings dug up from the bottom of a drawer that Plagia had begged for from friends in its early days. But Goldovsky's values were elsewhere. His little articles were simply to say, "I'm here." He immediately started offering up all sorts of extraordinary plans. Most of all, he loved the ambitious list the Plaschites had feverishly put together after Adam's exhibition. They put together tiny promo booklets for each of them. These listed their previous accomplishments, their vision, and where the comrade was striving. Next to each little project stood very modest sums, because those taking vows of poverty had not the foggiest idea of what things cost in the real world. The document looked like this. Object: Nation of Goals. Experimental Anthology. Great Plagia's Secretary General Adam Makiewicz is a living propaganda poster, powerful and uncomparable. He is here to say, as he is, so should you be. How, then? So that you don't blow away in a tempest, so that the curses of the wicked fall away from you, and so that even bran tastes sweet because you are the giver of value, and so that everything you do, your heart calls you to do. If your heart does not call you, you do not do. And finally, the limits of your possibility open to the horizon of your thoughts. Adam rules his world from a striped mattress surrounded by cigarette butts. He does nothing he does not want to do, and he believes that everything is possible. Object: Empty rooms, beautiful girls. Exhibition. Wanda Jesko is an engineer of conservative methods, a chemical technician. She is distinguished in her field by a quest for the monumental. Her big is always bigger than others. As she was putting together her latest exhibition, her colleagues said, "You can't print something so big." She proved them wrong. She has no plans of stopping. In her next exhibition, Wanda Jesko will unite her two interests, architectural abstraction and the person. As she shows you things the way they are not, she shows you truths about how they are. Girl, room, street, darkness and light. Truths long lost behind habit, forgotten. She shows you the eternal repeating feeling that appears at night. Concentrated memory. Object: Project Laws. Exhibition plus book. In school, Yurtsenyemich was always the best at drawing. There are some boys who can do the best cars and the best robots, but it was different this time. Yurtse was the best at drawing in the entire school, and clearly, in the whole city, the whole country, and beyond. Such hand-eye coordination was simply given. He didn't have to practice to get better. It simply developed in the backstage of his brain. But the world wasn't particularly interested in Yurtse's drawings, as so frequently happens, and Yurtse wasn't interested in the world either, nor in drawing. It was something that had just happened to him. Yeah, he can do it. The central art Yurtse has honed over the past 10 years is how to do as little as possible. You'd be surprised. But even still, nobody's dumped a pile of money on him and said, "Draw what you want." Does a primal urge for donuts, better cigarettes, and people's love still throb in the back of his mind? One can only hope. Maybe he'll make us something blinding. Object: Project Flag. Quality essays. Julia Mosakowska is almost the only Polish Kantian, a living, shining person who has succeeded in passing through the academic system and taking the best from it without becoming disfigured herself. Mosakowska grabs you. She reads like fire and ice, reserved but smoldering. Her use of language is subtle and refined. Her moral compass is calibrated to the 1,000th of a degree. It would be a victory for Polish if there were more for her work. But every text exists only to the degree that it is read. Thus, Yulia has no plans to add her 2 centimeters of Kant research to the library stacks, where her sweat and toil would sit under a pile of dust before finally being forgotten forever. If you love words, you should liberate her, not bury her. Mosakovska wants to bring Kant's thought to a wider discussion and nearer to people. She wants to show its continued relevance and show its possibilities in a context dominated by French postmodernists. Footnote: everything is intricately awful, and only the apocalypse can save us. End footnote. Or then analytical philosophers. Footnote: their music makes the trains run, but they have nothing to say to or about people. End footnote. For whom Kant's name is an obscenity. The project encompasses a wide-stroke reinterpretation of German idealism, but Yulia won't limit herself to philosophy. Her prism can encompass all that exists, just like a regular person's. Object: Project Birthday. Exhibition with large, colorful pictures. Arkadiusz Rusnak is truly the artist of our times. Surprisingly, this means exactly the same thing master meant in the olden days. From as young as 20, Rusnak's skills have managed to put food on his table. The fullness of his painting technique means he even gets orders from abroad. Work has made him a great workman, although he's still lacking something. His work deserves more. An artist wants to look at his paintings from afar, from 20 meters away, and come closer so that it rises above him. The standard painting format of today is colossal, and he wants other people to see it that way too, the way the paintings were intended. For that, they must be put up in a club somewhere, in the foyer of a theater, in an open place where people like to go. Object: Project Budget Line. A year's worth of quality culture journalism. The Plagie newspaper has been publishing only better and better material for 5 years already. It's work that's been done by volunteers, and that's how it will stay. But some people's free will, it seems to us, works better if you measure it a bit. Plagie has always wanted to develop, diversify itself, and include interesting thinkers and specialists. For example, we'd be very interested in publishing music reviews by a certain R.J., one of Poland's biggest musicians. In our media landscape, that would be a previously unseen phenomenon. He has repeatedly verbally expressed his competence and the sharpness of his opinions, and the fact that he's done so seriously well with song lyrics is a reason to think that journalistic pieces wouldn't be above his talents. But without money, he won't do it. In addition, we have to confess that all of our time is limited, and if Plagie's main team is busy with bigger projects than the magazine, they have less time to spend hammering outdated thoughts onto paper. Object: Project Let Your Country Come. Album. Alors, we're in formation. Our lines are unshakable, our mind unbroken. Brave children are history's favorites. This album speaks of bravery, mainly of bravery, but also of history, of all-conquering imagination, and of goodness, which is destroyed if no one cares about it. This can be a real disco ball, this album. Serious heat, gives like crazy. Let justice prevail, or the world burn. It'll come out when it's ready. And Rusnak will make a larger-than-life-sized painting for every song. That's cool! Let's do it! Goldovsky shrieked. Why are there so few projects? Why so small? Who writes a 200-page novel? Who does an exhibition of only 10 pictures? If we need to, let's rent a hall. Let's create a publishing house. Who asks for less money to write a novel than a cab driver makes in a day? Rewrite this project and add a 0 to all the numbers. Goldovsky had endless ideas. He could show up maniacally energized at somebody's doorstep at 3 a.m, throw the sleepy character out of bed, and head off to some cheap hole in the wall to eat fatty pastries. One could only imagine what they talked about there. Regardless, Adam was soon mostly convinced that Goldovsky had changed his tune, that he was actually totally progressive, and had the right understanding of the world. He really did have a soul, and some people need to see that in order to consider a person a person. He likes jolts. He likes when something is up and then it's down again, that everything whirls all the time, and never stays still for a moment. If it stays still, Goldovsky starts cursing, and he curses until things start moving again, no matter the direction. He couldn't stand stagnant water for a second. He wants the future, but the kind of future that would be awesome. that would mix all cultures, peoples, and languages, that would be sublime in its filth and multiplicity, which would be above and beyond in every way, and it would somehow still be friendly all the time. He's a communist at heart. What difference does it make that his communism is America? Maybe America is more communist than here. Might as well be. There was not a single thing Goldovsky hated more than nationalism. The state, rules, bureaus. But power, especially when it wasn't particularly transparent, that he liked. And he had it, too, although he had much less than he let on. He simply liked brashness, saying the first thing that came to your mind. He was crazy for new districts with tall buildings, clunky grey houses, and wide streets. He liked them in principle. For whatever reason, he didn't live somewhere in Bemovo. For whatever reason, he lived in the city center in a massive apartment full of gilded furniture with lion paw feet. But when he opened his mouth, Abram Godolsky declared, "Everything should be wild, equal, free." Of course, a person is a riddle, and contradictions are an innate part of it. You can go about wearing a mile-wide radius of the strongest, most expensive colognes that you certainly can't get in Poland. You can wear such white shirts and such shining shoes that it's a little bit comic, and you can love slums at the same time. Drunks, back alleys, park bench sleepers, street sweepers, drifter boys. Of course you can. To prove it, Abram typically wore old sweatpants and laceless sneakers, but a fragrance as well. He thought that life changed in leaps. No slow jingling or development by centimeters. One moment something is, and then bang! It isn't. In its place is something different, and you can never know what it'll be. And that's awesome. "You have to fly," said Abram. "If other people take the bus, cab, horse, sleigh, then we're going by plane. Absolutely." Basically, his plan to make the world better was closest to Daniel's, if only it's reciprocal. Freedom, but not for workers. They're free anyway. Who's stopping them from working? There's been enough work for them until now, but soon maybe there won't be any work at all. What then are workers? Criminals. Abram liked criminals noticeably more than he liked the proletariat. But money and entrepreneurship, those should be free. And so free that in 10 years every Pole should have their own Lamborghini. Everybody should be walking around in white shirts, black shoes, gold chains, and sunglasses. And it's all private property, of course. In any case, the world is full of private property. The amount of private property has to grow explosively. And generally, imprisonment should be a part of education. Better than the army. Go sit out your 2 months, and maybe afterwards you'll have a better idea where they send people society doesn't like. If equality, then equality. And you should take power when it's dangling, and nobody else wants it. Or wants it less. Wants it somehow tepidly. There are always cracks in the system where a little light oozes out and where you can build beautiful things. But only people like Adam and Slisław and Arkadiusz and Samuel and all the others can see it. Sitting in the cracks, making beauty. "But that's nonsense," pronounced Goldovsky. "Sit in cracks and wait until the asphalt breaks apart? That takes centuries. I say you have to fly over it with a pickaxe."